Hello and welcome, friends. I welcome all of you to another Usanas Dialogue series. And today we have a very accomplished and interesting guest with us, Dr. Efraim Inbar, one of the finest experts on the Middle Eastern conflict, crisis, and all that goes in the Middle East, all what happens out there. We are really lucky and honored to have him with us today. He has worked with several think tanks and he is currently the president of Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security and the founding director of the famous Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. So definitely, it's a real pleasure, it's a real delight for any IR student or even a lay enthusiast of international relations to listen to an eminent authority like Dr. Efraim Inbar. I will not waste much time, and I'll just mention the title of today's briefing, which is "The War on Hamas and Its Regional and International Implications." It's going to be almost 2 months now since that horrendous terror attack took place in Israel, and it just almost awakened us and made us realize that this threat and this menace of terror is not yet over, and it's getting more and more dangerous. Even after 2 months, we see that the Hamas leadership is not eliminated, and definitely the Israeli forces are getting success. They have wiped out most of the Hamas entrenchments and their bases in the North Gaza. But still, we find that there's a lot that's to be done, and that's about the Hamas leadership. Besides that, we also see Hezbollah getting more and more active on the other front, and maybe, I mean, who knows? But in the future, some of the state actors who are supporting these proxies may get even more active, more violent, and more prominent. And if that happens, the escalation can go to the next level. So today we have the best expert, and I'll just hand it over to Dr. Inbar to lecture us and to shower us with his insights and wisdom on the subject. Over to you, Dr. Inbar.
Thank you very much, Abhinav. It's my pleasure to speak to you, and I apologize again for what happened yesterday. Sometimes happen emergencies that take me away from my desk. I will start with explaining the context of this war, the regional context. Basically, we are talking about a war of the axis of resistance, mukawama in Arabic. Basically, those actors in the Middle East that do not see Israel as a legitimate actor in the area because of their religious conviction that Islam does not allow for the emergence of a Jewish state in this region. And for them, it is a religious aberration. And I'm talking, of course, of Hamas, but we have to realize that Hamas is a proxy of Iran. And the leader of the Axis is Iran, a strong state in the Middle East, ruled by religious zealots since 1979. And they have very effectively, in a very sophisticated way, organized a network of proxies that are subservient to Tehran and further the interests of Iran. We are talking about Hamas. We are talking in Gaza, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In Lebanon, it is Hezbollah, which basically has taken over the state. In Syria, we have Iranian militias. And in Iraq, we have a similar phenomenon. And we have also a militia that is a Shiite militia that is subservient to Iran, the Houthi minority in Yemen that has also taken part in the war. Now, the strategy of the axis of resistance is population-centric. Iran and its proxies understand that they cannot take on the might of the Israeli military. And therefore, their strategy focuses on what they see as the weak point of the Israeli society, the civilians. And indeed, the attack on October 7 was primarily against civilians, and the Hamas was successful in killing over 1,000 Israelis, which is approximately, relatively, 200,000 Indians. So this is the extent of damage to Israel. And I must say that the atrocities that were mentioned before were pre-planned. It was not part of the heat of the battle. All those things were, they were instructed to do so. We have their plans, and they also documented it with their cameras that were on the Hamas operatives, that in order to frighten the Israeli population. Their hope is that after a series of attacks, eventually the Jews in Israel will despair, will have no hope, and will eventually leave the country, making it easier to overrun the country by military forces. This is the strategy of Iran. This is the strategy of its proxies. The interesting phenomena was that this is a multi-front war. Hamas was successful in dragging the additional actors into the war. Of course, it was mentioned that Hezbollah joined the fray, although in a very limited and measured way, careful not to cross certain lines in order not to cause an escalation. This is probably an order from Tehran. Similarly, we were attacked from Syria by militias that are under the control of Iran, also Hamas militias that were transferred from Lebanon to Syria. And of course, all of you heard about the attacks of the Houthis in the south, at the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, interfering not only with Israeli freedom of navigation, but generally, which is a problem that probably the Americans will have to deal with. I don't know how successful they'll do it, and hopefully will not have to do it on our own. Now, the goals of the Israeli campaign are quite clear. Basically, to destroy the military capability of Hamas to harm Israel. This is a military goal, not a political goal. And we fully understand that we cannot eradicate an organization such as Hamas, which is well rooted within the Palestinian society. It is an ideological organization that has large support among the Palestinians. For example, there are polls that show that their candidate for prime minister, named Khania, it doesn't matter, will receive 60% of the support of the Palestinians. Polls taken during the war shows that 80% of the Palestinians are supporting the Hamas attack on October 7. 75% of the Palestinians, according to a poll taken in the summer, don't believe that Israel will celebrate its 100 year, its centennial. We are now at the age of 75, more or less like you. So this ideology, this hostility toward Israel is well rooted among the Palestinians. Therefore, as a clear lesson, interim lesson of the campaign is that we can't forget about the two-state solution. If a Palestinian state will be established, it will be a revisionist state intent on destroying the Jewish state. And of course, we have no interest in having such a state as our neighbor. The Palestinians, according to the trends in the polls, according to the type of education they get, are not going to be nice neighbors to Israel. So Israel's goal in taking over Gaza, in conquering Gaza, has no political goal. To implant somebody else there, we know it's beyond us, beyond our capability to engineer a friendly state. What we want is, at the end of the operation, all military capacity will be destroyed. The military units will be non-existent. The leaders will be killed or fled, or they will flee the region, and no missile manufacturing capability anymore, no bases. Hamas will not be there, despite the fact that we understand that a large part of the population will still support the Hamas ideology and goals. In a war, we have to understand that two equations are at war. The first equation is who inflicts more damage, more pain on the other side. Unquestionably, Israel is a stronger actor and can inflict much damage upon Hamas and its friends. But there is another equation in every war at war, and this is the capability to bear pain. And only the two calibrated equations will indicate who is the winner in the war. And actually, Hamas is ready to bear pain. Not only that, Hamas' strategy is population-centric in two ways. Of course, it's population-centric against Israel, but population-centric also against their own people. They use the Palestinians as a human shield. They want Israelis to create havoc among Palestinian civilians, because this will, the pictures coming out of Gaza, will produce pressure upon Israel, international pressure, to stop the war. If the war is stopped and Hamas stays in power, despite the big losses so far, Hamas is going to be the winner. So we have to understand that Hamas, in an unprecedented way, wants their own civilians to suffer, to bear pain. This is useful in attaining their goals. So I'll say just a few words about the final goal as Israel sees it. And I emphasize, we have no political goals. What we want is freedom of action in Gaza after the war ends, because we understand that Hamas, that is so popular, may re-emerge in Gaza. And we have to make sure that we are able to go in and take care of the new cells of Hamas that will appear. We call it mowing the grass. We have to mow the grass all the time in Gaza, and this is why we need freedom of action. And of course, for this goal, the best thing is chaos in Gaza. We don't care if there will be chaos, but any other arrangement, political arrangement, that will not allow Israeli freedom of action is not welcome by Israel. I want to say a few words about how we conduct the war. We have to conquer all Gaza, obviously, to hunt every Hamas operative. We adopted a very patient approach, which is facing two difficulties. One is urban warfare, which is problematic, and second is subterranean. The Gaza has a large network of tunnels which can be used easily by the Hamas. So we have to take care of the area above the ground and beyond and below the ground. Now, what characterizes Israeli warfare is also something unprecedented. We allow the civilians the choice to leave the battle zone. We tell them, we are going to attack a certain area, you better leave this area, and we'll tell you exactly where. That in that area that we direct you to go to, we are not going to attack. So we give the population the chance to spare their lives, and this is, of course, a very humanitarian approach to war, in contrast to previous wars in which many civilians were involved. I'm a former paratrooper. I've been in several wars, and I know that the Israeli military behaves according to what we call the purity of arms. We try all the time to minimize collateral damage, and this is one reason we call upon civilians to leave the area. And we are proud to call ourselves the most moral army in the world, and hopefully we'll vanquish Hamas and will achieve our war goals. And now I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Efraim, for this very insightful lecture. I'm sure we have many questions for you because this has been the most intriguing subject for all of us. I guess we can begin with something which is already there in the chat box. In the meantime, we'll slightly formulate our questions in a better manner and then come back to you with many other questions. So there is one question. How has the current crisis changed Israel-Azerbaijan relations? Is it true that Azerbaijan is now providing weapons to Israel?
Azerbaijan and Israel have very good relations. It's a strategic relationship. Azerbaijan provides us with much of our energy, oil. Also, Azerbaijan's location is important to Israel. It is on the border of Iran. And it allows us to have eyes toward Iran. And we also are helping the Azeri army with weapons, particularly in the last war against Armenia. the Israeli weaponry, in particular their UAVs, unmanned air vehicles, were of great use to Azerbaijan. So this is a very good relationship. We also are pleased with this relationship because Azerbaijan is Muslim. The majority of its people are Muslim. Not only that, they are Shia. So we can have a cordial relationship with a Muslim Shiite nation, basically diluting the religious component from the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Thank you. So I don't know the name of the person who raised this question, but I hope your answer satisfies his or her queries. So I have now another question for you. I mean, what do you see happening in the future in Gaza? Let's say, I mean, the Israeli army conquers the entire Gaza. After that, so currently the population is moving out of Gaza to some people are going to the Egypt and through the Rafah border crossing and all that. So after this war is over, the Gaza is conquered. Do you think they'll come back to Gaza? What sort of the government structure will come into place?
First of all, the people, once we clean the area in the north, the people will be able to return to the northern part, and in each part that we finish cleaning the area of Hamas, the population will be allowed to return. I don't know exactly what kind of political structure will be there. The Gazans, in my view, have a right to choose their own structure. They are grown-ups. If we'll allow elections there, we all know what the results will be. Hamas will be back.
Yes.
So basically what we say, it's not our problem. Of course, it will affect our interests, but we have no appetite whatsoever to rule over Gazans. There is a rhetoric question: who wants Gaza? And
Yeah.
there are not too many takers for positive answers. The Egyptians don't want to be there. I don't think the Emiratis want to be there. The Americans try maybe to establish some inter-Arab international force to rule Gaza. I always believe that the Israelis are not competent enough to rule over Arabs. It should be done by Arabs with Arab methods. And it's a lot of uncertainty what will happen in Gaza after we decide to go back. At a certain point, Israel will say to the Americans, we are going home, it's your baby. And we'll see what happens.
But it's certainly a big question because questions pertaining to civil administration, law and order, basic utilities, governance, they will be haunting like most of the watchers of this situation. And I afraid that it doesn't turn out to be a bad land like Somalia, where in the absence of any proper systematic ruling authority, all sorts of these rogue actors find a safe haven. So I mean, definitely, it's $1 million question. But so far, right now, I accept what you say that Americans have to take care of it, and let's see what Americans do. So I open the floor to the other participants today who are present here. Please feel free to ask your questions. You can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself, and even show your face if you want to, and ask good questions. If you don't have questions, then I have other questions for Dr. Efraim. Please feel free to ask questions.
I convinced all your audience.
Mehak, Preeti, anyone? Yeah, so there's one more question. How is the war on Hamas affecting Israel's? Just a moment, I'll read it out here. How is the war on Hamas affecting Israel's relations with other Arab nations? It was slowly warming up to.
I
I mean,
think
what's
that
happening to the Saudi-Israel deal? Is it still on the cards?
I think that current war was a test for the Abraham Accords, and it was a successful test. After all, neither Bahrain nor United Arab Emirates, neither Morocco, have severed the diplomatic relations with Israel. Actually, the contacts with those countries go on as usual because there are common interests. With Saudi Arabia, I think the Saudis said openly that the normalization process is still on the table, and they are willing to negotiate the normalization with Israel. And the reason for this phenomenon is quite clear. Nobody likes Hamas. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Palestinian offshoot, and the Muslim Brotherhood is an enemy of the current Arab regimes. Actually, in private, those countries are very happy that we are doing the dirty job of vanquishing Hamas. In the Middle East, we always have to remember that we have to distinguish between what is said public and what is said
Yes.
in closed rooms. So forget about what is being said in public. The interactions between us and those countries continue uninterrupted. Some of them are above the table, some of them are under the table. And as one of my colleagues once quipped, under the table is very crowded.
Under the table is very
crowded.
Crowded, okay. So yes, the distance between the drawing rooms and bedrooms matter a lot.
Yes.
So we have another question. Where are Israel-Turkey relations moving? How do you see the future of these relations?
I spent a lot of time in Turkey. I wrote a book on Israeli-Turkish relations. And at this stage, the relations are not very good. Turkey, as you all know, is led by Islamist, Turkish version of the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan, Tayyip Erdogan. He is an anti-Semite. There are many expressions and statements that verify this dishonorable status. And so he accuses us, Israel, of being a terrorist state, and Turkey is hosting Hamas leadership. It's giving Turkish passports to Hamas operatives to be able to move freely in the world. And this is something we really have problems with. At the same time, I must say that Erdogan has some, pragmatism, and Turkish-Israeli economic relations were almost not touched. There is a solid economic relation, although many Israelis are boycotting now Turkish products. It is, I know that in recent months there was a serious drop in imports from Turkey, but this might change. Also, a lot of Israelis went as tourists to Turkey. I think this will be also affected by the tensions between Turkey and Israel. However, after Erdogan, and Erdogan is not going to live forever, there might be a change in the relationship between the two countries. The two countries had excellent relations in the 90s of the previous century, very close military relationship. We have to understand that at the realpolitik level, Turkey is a rival of Iran, and Iran is a rival of Israel. I think that the Turks are not pleased with the nuclear advances in Iran, and at certain points they can see us an ally, as they did in the past. But it will take time.
Ephraim, so I have a question. Basically, I mean, not long back, until recently, I always found many takers for the idea of two-state solution, not just outside, even in Israel. You know, among the intellectuals, I would say the left-wingers, or even some big media houses, they always spoke about two-state solution. But you know, if you see, in effect, you already had not just two, but three-state solution: Gaza, West Bank, and Israel, which kind of failed. So are there any more takers of two-state solution within Israel among the common populace?
What we call the peace camp was terribly weakened as a result of the failure of the Oslo Accord. So there are few diehards, for the two-state solution in Israel, on the left, the side of the political spectrum. But most Israelis understand that the Palestinian national movement is a very problematic movement. If we take a look at its achievements so far, since Oslo, 93, basically they established a failed state in the West Bank. And I want to specify what a failed state means. A state, according to the Weberian, definition, is a political entity with monopoly over use of force. This is what a state is. No militias, no private militias. All coercive organs are under the control of the state. And the Palestinians have not established control over the organs of state. They have militias. One militia took over Gaza in 2007. And in the territories that are under its control, there are militias. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, hardly controls towns like Jenin or Shechem or certain refugee camps where there are independent militias. So they are a failed state. And so the Palestinian National Movement established a failed state in the West Bank. And another failed state in Gaza. In Gaza also, there is not only one militia. We have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, we have militias controlled by clans, and so and apart from it, it's a terrorist entity. So those are the successes of the Palestinian national movement, and we understand that this type of dysfunctional Palestinian national movement is very problematic as a peace partner. You sign a deal, and who's going to enforce it? There is nobody to enforce it, because there are always one or two, three militias that say, no, I don't sign on this agreement. So we have no strategic address for making agreements or for deterrence. So the Palestinian National Movement is a very problematic partner for us. And this is why the two-state solution is problematic. And I'll give you two additional reasons for why the two-state solution is not going to work anytime soon. First of all, if we take a look at the demands of the Palestinian Authority and the demands of the Israelis, territorial and other areas, the gap between the two positions is too large to overcome in the near future. Also, if we take a look at the two societies, both societies still have a lot of energies to fight for over what is important to them. Therefore, it is a conflict that will continue. Maybe I'll share with you a story. I once gave a talk, a briefing like this one, but in person, to a Greek think tank, and somebody asked me, "No, how much do you fight the Palestinians? Enough is enough." And I asked the Greek questioner, how many years did you fight the Turks? And I knew the answer. And he said 400 years. So I said, oh, okay, if so, we are a relatively young conflict in comparison to your conflict with the Turks. So I think the right perspective on this conflict, it should be historic. It's how many years do you fight with Pakistan? Is it going to end anytime soon in Kashmir?
No.
Probably not. I can tell you from far
Yeah.
away that this is something that will continue for our lifetimes. I don't want to think beyond that. So there are certain types of conflict, ethno-national conflict, ethno-religious conflict, that as long as the two societies have energies to fight, they are not going to end. One side has to get tired, and it takes time for collectives to get tired.
Thank you. We have a question from our team member, Mahek Johri. She writes that there are talks about establishing a Gaza ceasefire. How effective and sustainable do you think such a ceasefire is going to be? Just a moment. In this conflict situation like Gaza, I guess Hamas has already broken the ceasefire. But yes, if you would like to take up the question, just to discuss a little more about the ceasefire. But adding to that, because you just mentioned about Pakistan, we recently came across a huge support for Hamas in Pakistan, massive support. And maybe you would like to share some thoughts on that too. That'll make some Indians happy.
Well, I'm not surprised that the Pakistanis are showing support for Hamas. They showed support for the Taliban. So that's the same, same group. And I know that in Pakistan there is a strong radical Islamic element, maybe running the government even. So, or depends on whom you ask. I'm not an expert on Pakistan, but it doesn't surprise me. Although I sometimes hear different tunes from Pakistanis I meet. And there was, once in a while, there is a discussion there about having relations with diplomatic relations with Israel, but I don't hold my breath. Now about a ceasefire, it depends if the ceasefire is for the purpose of exchanging prisoners or the hijacked for the terrorists to hold, it may hold for a while. Our experience with ceasefires is mixed. Sometimes ceasefires are honored, sometimes are not honored. With Hamas, it's very difficult. Usually, almost every ceasefire we had with Hamas, 10 minutes after the ceasefire started, we were attacked by missiles, and they said, oh, it was a mistake. It was somebody, the electrical system didn't work. Or, many excuses, but we know that they are going to be violated. So ceasefire by nature is something temporal.
She has a follow-up question. Despite persistent calls for ceasefire and negotiations from within Israel, the Israeli government appears to have made no discernible effort to secure the release of the hostages. This lack of action on the part of the government raises concerns about the welfare of the hostages and the nation's ability to safeguard its citizens. Given the gravity of the situation, what's your take on this?
Well, first of all, Israel agreed to a ceasefire and was able to secure over 100 hostages just a few weeks ago, when Hamas eventually violated the articles of the agreement and stopped continuing to release certain, women and children in exchange for additional days of ceasefire. So we are ready for a ceasefire for a specific period, for a specific, duration of the ceasefire, but not for stopping fighting. Hamas nowadays wants Israel to have a ceasefire with no end, basically to end the war. This is something that we are not ready, and because attaining the goal of vanquishing Hamas is very important to us, primarily to restore deterrence and for us, for the state of Israel. At the same time, we are, of course, aware that the longer the hostages are in the hands of Hamas, their health is deteriorating, they don't get fed, some of them are old, they are babies there, they don't get the medicines they need. But in my view, there is an order of priorities, and attaining the goals of the war seems to me more important, because this is about the security of the nation, the collective security, rather than the personal security of the hijack. I must say that we believe also that continuing the military operations puts additional pressure on Hamas, maybe to accept a better deal for exchange of prisoners.
Thank you. So I have one question. It seems that I've also been talking to some of the terrorism experts working in the Southeast Asia, and some of them, they have like very strong inputs about Hamas, strong presence in countries like Malaysia. They're getting a lot of support there. So there's a strong likelihood that after this war, Hamas leadership finds safe havens in some of its supporters, like let's say Turkey, Qatar, Malaysia, or maybe Pakistan. At the same time, we see that Hezbollah is not yet destroyed. It's a force to reckon with. Iran continues to be the main supporter, and maybe like after 5 years, because of the growing Chinese aggression and the Russian activities, Americans may not be as powerful as they are right now, or may not be that strong, like in a position to support you the way they are doing it right now. So is Israel thinking of any long-term strategy to deal with this problem? Because something needs to be done about the Iran's nukes. Like, is there anything on the cards, or it's just about the near-term solution?
Well, Iran is obviously the main challenge. It's, as I mentioned, the head of the resistance axis.
Yes.
And also it is getting close to a bomb. Yes. Actually, in November, the International Atomic Energy Agency published a report pointing out further advances on the nuclear path in Iran. This is a cause of concern. To some extent, Iran was successful in deflecting our attention from the nuclear program to a secondary arena, which is Gaza. What should be done, and I'm on record already since 2005, is a preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear installations. We are close to it at some point, and then it was decided not to do it. In my view, it was a mistake, and we have to get back to it. That I'm just in the middle writing of an article saying that we have to refocus after Gaza and go after Iran. This is an existential issue for Israel. Because if Iran is allowed to gain nuclear weapons, we may see also nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt will go for it, and a multipolar Middle East is a strategic nightmare for Israel.
Yes.
About Hamas, Of course, there will always be actors, particularly in the Muslim world, that will host Hamas. I mentioned Turkey. Of course, their main source of support is Qatar, a terrible sheikdom. And also, you mentioned Indonesia, Malaysia. I think we made clear that after we conquer Gaza, we will hunt the Hamas leadership all over the world. And we have some successes in the past, reaching certain areas in the world. And I think that if we are determined, and we can do it. So I would not ensure, I would not issue a life insurance for those guys.
Well, that sounds very interesting, and certainly pertaining to this these days. A breed of unknown men has become very difficult and problematic for Pakistan. Every day, some unknown men are coming in, killing, the terrorist commanders of Lashkar, Jaish. I don't know who those unknown men are. Maybe we get to see some more unknown men killing the Israel's enemies in places like Malaysia, Turkey, Qatar, or Pakistan in the future.
Inshallah.
Great. So yes, regarding the Iran, it seems that this regime is a major problem. So in case, as you just mentioned, those previous strikes, but do you think that any long-term strategy has some sort of a framework or vision for replacing the regime,
Obviously, the best possibility would be regime change in Iran. The issue is not the bomb. The issue is the regime, a radical Islamic regime that may have at its disposal a nuclear bomb. This combination is a problem. So Spain is not concerned about the French nuclear force de frappe. Germans are not concerned about the French or the British bombs, because they believe that the regime is a stable democratic regime that will use its nuclear power in a judicious way. This is not the case for Iran. However, the efforts for regime change in Iran, I think, were not satisfactory and definitely not effective. And Iran is still has the mullahs at its helm. And it's also, we shouldn't forget that regime change is not something easy, because the regime at this time is ready, as it's shown in the past, is ready to shoot at demonstrators, at opponents. It is a ruthless regime, and it's very difficult to unseat such a regime. It's easy to demonstrate in Los Angeles and other places where the Iranian diaspora lives, but in Tehran, in Isfahan, in those places, it's more difficult. And so far, the opposition was unsuccessful in conducting a regime change. And again, I don't think it's in the cards anytime soon.
And do you feel it's increasingly getting super difficult, given the fact that Mr. Putin is making rounds in Middle East, and China is trying to, precipitate some sort of an agreement, rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Given these, big powers making a big entry in the Middle East, and also the limitations that they're putting on the American influence, don't you think that it's going to be even more difficult in the future for Israelis?
The Iranians decided to align themselves with Russia and with China because they're anti-American. They want the Americans out of the Middle East, They don't hide it, they say. And of course, they capitalized on the Ukraine war in order to endear themselves to the Russians. They also are ready to flirt with the Chinese, despite that China is not a real power in the Middle East. It doesn't have, the weight that the Russians have and that the Americans have there. But it is something that it may be good for Israel. A more neutral Iran would have been a more difficult subject to tell the Americans, listen, they are anti-American and you have to support us in this war. Americans are reluctant to use force now in the Middle East. They were not very successful in Afghanistan, in Iraq. This administration is particularly averse toward the use of force. One of the reasons they brought in carriers, the nuclear submarine into the region is in order to prevent an escalation, regional escalation. They warn Israel, don't touch Houthis, don't escalate vis-a-vis Hezbollah, because they are very reluctant to take upon Iran. So Iran, despite the fact that it is a problem for the Americans, they prefer what I call an ostrich type of behavior. They bury their head in the sand. They don't want to see it. Kicking the can to the next administration.
They're absolutely right. I agree. And Americans, it's not just like just the ostrich-like attitude, but with some of their world's best IR schools, foreign policy universities, and some of their brightest minds, they make biggest strategic blunders. Afghanistan was a collapse. It was a colossal disaster because they did not target the real master, that is Pakistan. If they had crushed Pakistan, if they had crushed the Pakistani regime, the Mullah Islamist nexus in Pakistan, they would have won Afghanistan, or Afghanistan would have been a lot better long back. Instead of Iraq, the target should have been Iran long back. So they have wrong priorities and sometimes a very narrow vision. So that's the cause, of such colossal failures, and also the problems which ripple off from such big failures. So we have one last question. Yes, you want to say something? You're saying something.
I fully agree with your diagnosis of the Americans having a very myopic
yes.
strategy.
I mean, just imagine they were paid, in Pakistan, they were funding the Pakistani regime, and Pakistani regime was, using that money to fund Taliban, who was sending body bags back to Afghanistan. And we today,
some of my best friends were, the neocons in Washington, and I told them, forget about bringing democracy to Afghanistan. Of course, forget about Iraq. I told them, Paul Wolf, close friend, we studied together. Go into Iraq, defeat Saddam, bring your son of a bitch, dictator, general, and get out. And they didn't. And this was true also of Afghanistan. I don't know if you know, Zalmay Khalilzad was also a close friend of mine. And he was viceroy in Afghanistan. He's Pushtun, by the way.
Yes. and there are a lot of theories about what he did in Afghanistan. I mean, I guess, it's better not to delve into those details, but certainly, I mean, whatever he did in Afghanistan, there was not in the best interest of the Americans.
Okay.
So we have one last question for today's session, and that sounds like a very abstract question from one of our team members, Jayendra Singh. I don't really understand, but maybe you can answer it better. What are some cultural or religious aspects that influence the regional perspective on the Israel-Hamas situation?
Well, I think it's quite clear that there are aspects in the holy scripts of the in the Quran and maybe in other sources, religious sources, that are very unfavorable toward Jews. You know, I'm a religious person myself, and I know that religious people choose their verses. In every religion, you can find a verse for doing that and for doing the opposite. You choose, you know, according to your moral compass. And unfortunately, Hamas and Islamists, you know, radical Islamists, are choosing verses that put them inevitably in conflict with the Jewish national movement. And as a result of that, they become implacable enemies. So there is definitely a religious component to the Arab Israeli, to the Palestinian Israeli, to the Hamas Israeli, you know, conflict, disputes. And this is very unfortunate, but it's something that can be changed only by people of close, by, you know, their religious leaders. They should tell them, listen, look at this verse, which, you know, live peacefully with your neighbor, you know, love thy brother. You know, there are plenty of nice verses in every religious text. So, but they don't. So this makes the conflict more difficult, unquestionably. It's not over territory.
Yeah.
It's not just a piece of land. A piece of land can be divided. You can play with it. It's about identity. It's about holy places. Look, you know, in India you have a temple that was disputed between Hindus and Muslims, and it's probably still a source of friction between the two communities. Those things are very difficult to overcome.
Yes, very true. I absolutely agree. And so with this, we come to the end of today's session. And definitely, I personally feel that it has been one of the most insightful and scintillating discussions that we had in Usanas Foundation. And I would really like to convey my heartfelt thanks to you for joining us today. And certainly, it's a great beginning of Usanas Foundation's relationship with GISS. And I look forward to many more sessions with some of your eminent experts, you know, on the topics and the subjects of mutual interest. And there's a great way to go forward, and there's a long way to go, definitely. You know, I mean, we are all gung-ho about the great India-Israel friendship. And thank you once again for joining us today. Also, my sincere thanks to the team members and the people who joined today to listen to this lecture. We'll have the recording ready soon and we'll upload it on our YouTube channel. I will send it to you, but you can also just go to YouTube, type Usanas Foundation, and have a look at this recording. Once again, thank you very much. We'll soon be back with some another session on another topic. And I look forward to a very constructive and continuing engagement with GISS in the future. Thank you.
I concur, and I'm very happy to have this relationship. It's going to be from our common smiles. Is going to be a very fruitful and pleasant relationship.
Maybe if we ever get a chance to see some of your paratrooping skills, that would be such a delight.
Again, I didn't hear.
If we ever get a chance to see some of your paratrooping skills, that would be such a delight.
Okay, I'm ready always to jump. I don't put me in an airplane with a parachute. I am ready to demonstrate my skills.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you, sir, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.